Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lara, or Lara Likes Mascara. On my channel, I talk about all things makeup no buy, low buy, and conscious consumerism. Today's video is very much going to be within those kinds of topics. Oh my god, my earring just fell out. But the format is going to be a little bit different. Essentially, I love doing, I don't think they're called video essays, but I just talk about a lot of different topics. So I've talked about the problems with decluttering. I've talked about the issues with marketing within the beauty community. Just a couple of various topics that I feel like are important to discuss. But I've never done kind of an overview of the beauty community as a whole. And that's essentially what today's video is. So I am currently doing my PhD, not related to makeup or YouTube or social media or anything like that, but I took a course which was about consumerism essentially, and the way that everything has been commodified. So for my final paper, I wrote about the YouTube beauty community and kind of the evolution of it, how it's changed over the years, and what we're seeing now, the trends that we're seeing within the beauty space. And I focused specifically on sort of the Project Pan and No Buy community on YouTube because that's where I am located. And I think it's a really interesting site for YouTube because so much of the beauty space on YouTube has been all about consumption. It didn't start that way, of course. It started out with mostly young women sharing their love of beauty on the internet. And then when companies realized that they were essentially great spokespeople for makeup brands and makeup products, then they got involved. So there's really been an evolution. And I shared a little while ago that I was writing a paper about this, and I got some really fantastic responses. Some people had great suggestions for resources I could use, or other YouTubers who did similar videos, and I incorporated that into my paper. And many of you said that you'd be interested in hearing what I wrote. So here it is. This is the overview and evolution of the YouTube beauty community. So let's get into it. And don't worry, this is not going to be super academic. I think that if you have been watching beauty gurus for any amount of time, you will find this very interesting because I found it fascinating to research. One of the resources that was recommended to me was this book called Face Paint, The Story of Makeup by Lisa Eldridge, who is a makeup artist. She does also have a YouTube channel, which also had really fantastic videos that were helpful. She's really interested in kind of the history of makeup and how it's changed over the years. So there was a lot of great information throughout this book. I did not read all of it, but I got some really helpful information out of it. So if you're interested in learning about the history of makeup, there's a lot of great stuff in here and really neat pictures. And you know, I really didn't used to think about the history of makeup or how there was like a first lipstick or a first mascara. So that was really neat to learn about. So I just wanted to introduce that text. Okay, so I was just recording for a little while myself, basically reading out the essay, but I feel like that's not super interesting. So if you're interested in the actual paper itself, I will link it down below, but I'm kind of just going to summarize it and insert my own thoughts and personal anecdotes because I feel like that's more interesting than just like reading my paper out loud. So the YouTube beauty community is relatively new, but makeup itself is not a new phenomenon. People have been wearing makeup for centuries upon centuries. I mean, just think of Cleopatra and her cat eyeliner, or like royals, English monarchy, and their talcum powder that basically killed them. People have been wearing makeup for a long time, but what has changed is wider access to makeup and the marketing of that makeup. Women are socialized today to believe that they need to wear makeup to fit in and also to keep up with makeup trends. And rather than it just being cosmetic companies that make these claims that women need to wear makeup, it's actually also other consumers that sell us these untruths or lies, often directly through social media channels. And as YouTube grew as a platform, so did the beauty community, with influencers being relied on more and more by cosmetic brands to sell product. So a little bit about the history of makeup. 18th century France was where the business of commercial and factory-made cosmetics began. And prior to the French Revolution at the end of the 1700s, men and women actually equally wore makeup. Powder and rouge were the most popular kinds of makeup. But then afterward, of course, makeup for men never regained that level of popularity, which meant that cosmetic sellers had a smaller, more targeted market, so they needed to focus on female consumers exclusively. The early 20th century saw the creation of brands like L'Oreal, Revlon, and Maybelline, but we didn't really see the huge influx of brands until the 1990s. Brands such as Urban Decay, Tarte, Anastasia Beverly Hills, and Too Faced were all created in this decade. And I learned a lot from Kelly Gooch's deep dives. She did deep dives on each of these brands where she sort of talked about the rise and fall, which is super interesting. I will link those videos below, highly recommend. And she continues to do these deep dives on other brands. So as we know, the industry continued to develop and sort of morph in the 2000s and 2010s, eventually with a real shift to reflect this fast fashion model. I think you know where I'm going with this. ColourPop came onto the scene, and where previously brands might launch one or a couple products a year, because of how ColourPop changed the market, that became very unusual. Now it sort of seems like most brands aim for quantity rather than quality. Alongside the makeup industry, another industry was taking place, which was the industry of influencers. Until recently, it was unheard of to sort of make a living creating pictures and posting them to a blog or Instagram or making YouTube videos, but with the rise of these social media platforms, it has become much more popular. And I actually saw a documentary recently called TikTok Boom at Hot Docs Film Festival, which was about the platform and sort of the influencers that make a living on it, and how many young people, especially kids, actually aspire to be influencers or content creators as their job. Very interesting. Highly recommend that doc. And social media has really changed the beauty industry. So of course, as companies realize the power of these platforms, they harness that power. The idea of public figures influencing everyday people's purchasing decisions isn't new, because celebrities have been selling us products for decades, but this is kind of a new way to do that. And there's more of an intimacy or level of trust that people have with influencers, especially smaller YouTubers. So some may see this advent of fashion blogging and makeup as a more accessible way to enter these industries, but these industries still perpetuate existing social inequalities. Fashion blogging, for example, is just really a new way to consume and be consumed. That quote is from Aja Barber, who wrote Consumed, which is a fantastic book. I will link it here. I actually discussed it in a previous video. Of course, there are still barriers to entry, such as, being able to afford a high quality camera or editing software, lighting, microphone. All this stuff is necessary, or, hosting a professional blog site. And often individuals with large, expensive makeup collections were the ones that gained traction on YouTube. And likewise, same with fashion, who had large clothing collections, shoe collections, what have you. These were the people who would gain an audience, and essentially people with disposable cash could afford to buy their way into the game, further advantaging privileged individuals. So Aja Barber says that the supposed democratizing effect of social media didn't really aid race and representation. Cis, white, able-bodied influencers receive more sponsorship and better fees than everyone else in all different areas. If you've heard of the influencer pay gap, this is actually an Instagram account that was created to help accountability, and so that influencers could disclose what sums they made to work with brands to try to help bridge this gap between what people of different backgrounds were making because of white supremacy, essentially. So now we get kind of into hyper-consumerism, because as these companies' practices have changed with how much makeup they're constantly pumping out, consumers have also changed their habits as well in order to keep up with new releases. And this has really created an endless feedback loop. Beauty YouTuber Alexandra Anelli, not sure how to say her name, actually discussed this in a video called Consumerism in the Beauty Industry is Wild. She talks a little bit about how, you're constantly feeling like you need to buy things and find the next holy grail. And she doesn't want to make people feel bad about wanting things, but you also shouldn't be wanting everything, so it's a real balance. I will link that below. And she also admits that it's kind of an issue because, you know, this is her job. She needs to try out new makeup. So even while she receives PR, she still continues to buy new makeup. And so purchasing new releases frequently is necessary. So, of course, I need to say that there's good and bad things that come along with the emergence of the YouTube beauty community. Knowledge around makeup is much more accessible. Everything I know about makeup, I learned from YouTube. I've been watching beauty tutorials since I was in high school, like grade 10, 11 is when I started. I mean, I don't think I'm like a makeup artist or the best at makeup, but I obviously have some skills and knowledge around it, and that is entirely due to YouTube. This is kind of funny actually, because I feel like people sometimes will like compliment me on my makeup or be like, oh wow, like you're so good at makeup, like just people who aren't great at makeup. And I'm kind of like, you know, like you could improve your makeup skills too if you wanted. Like you just have to watch some videos. You don't need to go out and take some classes. Like to me, it's sort of the easiest thing to do. It's so accessible, but I guess it just stems from lack of interest. Anyways, I'm getting off on a tangent here. So yeah, both YouTube and TikTok have been really helpful for sharing techniques, information, and of course product recommendations. And also one plus side is that with creators recommending their favorite products, we don't just have to rely on brand claims saying that, oh, this will last for 24 hours. Like there's actually people out there who will tell us if that's true. This has become a little bit more complicated with the advent of influencer marketing because incentivizing the creation of content around products, you know, introduces complexities. So when a cosmetic brand is sponsoring a creator's video, we don't necessarily know if they love that product as much as they say they do, if they would feel that way if they weren't being paid. And there's another feedback loop with, you know, more beauty content being created, and so more people being interested in makeup, and then there being more audiences for this and more products being made. I am a direct product of the beauty industry. I would not have made this channel if I hadn't been watching for so long. I mean, I think that's the same for everyone, right? Who just like makes videos about something and while never having actually watched videos about that. Like, do people make vlogs never having watched vlogs? I don't think so. I wrote a bit about ColourPop, but I don't really know if I need to go into ColourPop. Essentially, ColourPop has been, you know, rightfully criticized because of their fast fashion approach to makeup, and they are not ashamed of this at all. They have a lot of good practices, right? Like they're made in the US, they're vegan, they're cruelty-free. So they do everything technically right, but I can't help thinking that they are extremely environmentally destructive just because of the sheer amount of product that they are constantly pumping out. Another thing I want to touch on that Kelly Gooch has done a video about before is the fact that despite such a huge, vast makeup industry, there's so many brands today. I mean, it's just booming. The vast majority of brands are owned by just 8 companies, 8 parent companies. So yeah, Kelly Gooch did a video about how 8 companies basically own the entire cosmetics industry, which is rather alarming. It's basically a monopoly, and so it's very difficult to get out your product if you are an indie brand. Of course, most indie brands, you know, do not fall under these company umbrellas, and so that's part of the reason why it's better to support them, but it's much harder to kind of get your name out there if you are an indie brand. And so it's just increasingly challenging to establish a new company today. And also, Kelly Gooch also talks about this, there's so many celebrities who are coming out with makeup brands. Okay, so we've got Rihanna with Fenty Beauty, we've got Selena Gomez, Rare Beauty, Drew Barrymore, Flower Beauty, Ariana Grande, REM Beauty, Millie Bobby Brown, Florence by Mills, Victoria Beckham Beauty, Gwyneth Paltrow, Goop, Halsey, About Face, The Kardashians, Kylie Cosmetics, KKW Beauty, Lady Gaga, House Laboratories, and many, many more. These are just the most well-known ones. And so obviously these people have built-in audiences, and in some cases, this is part of the reason why it's so difficult for new brands to come in, and part of the reason why I think some older companies, which have been around for longer, haven't been able to sort of make it through the pandemic. We just heard that Bite Beauty is closing, and they're a fairly big brand. Of course, Becca closed just last year. Jordana Cosmetics closed. So I think everyone is sort of interested to see which if any other brands are closing. And I think it is kind of indirect result of how competitive the industry is now. I don't really have a conclusion on that. I just think it's interesting. So on makeup marketing, there's a lot that we can say, but I think we all sort of recognize how the makeup industry highlights people's insecurities and even feeds into those securities to make us feel like we need to buy things to fix those issues. If you're super oily, no problem. Buy a ton of skincare, buy mattifying primer, foundation, powder. Like, you can fix the things that are wrong with you. This is kind of what we're fed. And of course, social media has a huge role in constructing beauty standards. Think about filters on Instagram and TikTok. And then also, because we associate certain products with certain celebrities or influencers, we're further incentivized to buy those products to try to be like those individuals. And the YouTube beauty community really feeds into this hyper-consumption rhetoric by constantly posting makeup hauls, product recommendation videos, encouraging individuals to buy more stuff. And this gets especially bad around, the Sephora sale and Black Friday, of course. And I really think that this kind of consumption is social. There's this quote that says, "Demand has always been a socially regulated and generated impulse, not an artifact of individual whims or needs." Like, if we didn't watch these videos, we wouldn't feel the need to buy all of this stuff. I mean, sure, like, if we're on a low buy, maybe we're just buying the things that we need that are recommended by beauty influencers. But more often than not, I think that, we feel like we need these things because people say we need them. We wouldn't necessarily independently feel like we needed to purchase all of these lip liners. Okay, now into some happy topics. I think that the YouTube beauty industry is changing somewhat, or at least some segments of it. I'm not going to talk too much about PR because that's kind of its own thing, but it sort of further perpetuates how the influencer industry is not really an equal playing field. And also, I think it's important to note that the makeup industry is not excluded from systemic issues like racism. We've really seen in the past couple of years makeup brands sort of wake up and realize that they needed to make changes, whether it was with, their shade ranges. I feel like that's the main thing. This wake up sort of came as a result from the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests. Prior to this, many sold whitening products to promote fair skin, and those brands did come under fire. So beauty companies have been making an effort to be more inclusive in their shade ranges, but for a long time the beauty industry really neglected women of color, especially those with darker skin tones. And so historically Black-owned companies and independent beauty brands were the ones that worked to fill those gaps for consumers. I actually was not aware of this, but Sephora commissioned a really large study on racial bias in the industry, and there was some unsurprising but helpful results found to that study. So it talks about the invisible tax or burden that is on select demographics when they go shop in a Sephora, like actually in store or even shopping online. There's fewer products available. And so as a result of this, Sephora had this action plan, which included increasing the number of BIPOC-owned brands and trying to have a more diverse group of influencers representing them. And they're planning to share progress on this plan. They also are part of the Pull Up for Change campaign and the 15% pledge. So I'll link some more information about that below. But yeah, I think Sephora is doing a good job now. The question is just sort of, why has it taken so long? And of course, Sephora is not the only one. So let's talk about some trends in the beauty industry. So like the fashion industry, makeup has seasons and trends. YouTuber Jordan Teresa did a fascinating video about this. She doesn't just talk about beauty. She's kind of a common... Jordan Teresa talks in this video about, I'll link it here, how it's not just like makeup that has trends, but also trends within the beauty community and like our makeup collections. If you remember the massive makeup collections of like 2016, when people would share the rooms of their home that was just full of makeup, and that was just like the norm. This is just like hyper-consumerism. We don't really see that so much anymore. I think that it's more trendy to have like a more curated, minimal collection. I mean, the person who I watch who has the largest makeup collection is Julia Adams, and she regularly declutters her makeup, and she has a large collection, but she's fairly conscious about it and tries to keep her collection curated. She wants to make sure that she's always using everything, and I feel like that's kind of the norm now. And I think some people would see this or would have seen this as hoarding, just the sheer amount of makeup products that people had. So there's something interesting there in that. Also the fact that makeup expires, so like there's no point in hanging onto it forever. You know, it's different than having like a Pokemon collection in that way. Do people have Pokemon collections? Anyways, and I also think, you know, the rise of minimalism and Marie Kondo, that has really had an impact, not just on the beauty space, of course, but it definitely has impacted people's makeup collections as well. And along with wanting a more minimal collection for aesthetic reasons, it's true that consumers have also become more educated when purchasing goods in terms of their impact on the world around them, on the environment. And here's where I start to talk about a little bit the Project Pan community, which I, of course was not familiar with before I started on my no-buy. The Project Pan community sort of emerged in response to this proliferation of huge makeup collections. And for anyone who doesn't know, Project Panning basically means like using up your products, like fully panning a product means using it up. And so now there's a ton of people, not just people who create content, but also just people who have makeup collections who are inspired and encouraged to use up what they have rather than or before going out and buying new products. And I'm a huge fan of this, of course. We're also seeing a lot of YouTubers with smaller platforms or micro influencers like I am moving towards a more conscious or ethical consumerism. So some other people I watch who I would say sort of fall under this umbrella are Shauna Rapari, Rebecca Morgan, Sarah Rose. I talk about them all the time because we all sort of talk about the same topics and I think have similar views in this regard. While many may still have big collections, it is becoming more trendy to have a curated, intentional collection. And in a nutshell, the Project Pan community is an alternative that emphasizes appreciating what you have rather than owning more. And you can find this community on Reddit, on YouTube, on Instagram. You may be familiar with the page Makeup Rehab on Reddit. So it was created in 2014 and it has 113,000 members. It's for people who are on no buys, low buys, or just want to talk about makeup and beauty without being bombarded by sales, hauls, and other tempting posts. That's what it says on there. And it's about ramping up creativity and using your collection to the fullest. And it's really interesting because people on here talk about their experience with makeup addiction and share tips on how to finish products and stay motivated. And it's really a community-oriented framework. And this Reddit page actually came in response to the subreddit Makeup Addiction, which was created 4 years earlier in 2010 and has 3 million members. So obviously that's a much larger page, but I don't know, Makeup Rehab is really gaining traction. Of course, there are many creators who have showcased their journey of not buying makeup. I think Hannah Louise Poston is really the one that most people are familiar with, or sort of is the biggest. So she stopped buying entirely in 2018, and she has continued to make content sort of talking through her purchases and her approach to buying or conscious consumerism. I don't know if she terms it that way, but that's how I would describe it. And a lot of individuals like myself who create videos around conscious consumerism really prioritize ethics, personal ethics, and the ethics of brands that they choose to support and promote. Of course, you all know Empty's videos where we talk about what we've finished, anti-hauls where people discuss why they don't want to buy certain makeup products. And people have also talked about how joining a community actually helps keep them on track. And in particular, being part of the Instagram or Reddit Makeup No Buy community stops them from buying makeup. I have personally found anecdotally that despite thinking that having a larger collection means you love makeup more, actually the opposite is true. Having a more curated collection means you are able to use and love everything in your collection and allows you to get more creative with what you do have within those constraints. So personally, my no-buy really improved my relationship to makeup, and I've made countless videos about this, so I will link some of them here. And this is kind of revolutionary in a space where the norm is to encourage audiences to buy. Of course, I think it's important to note that it can kind of be a sacrifice for YouTubers to not be doing a lot of hauls or product recommendations, because that is what is popular and that is what will get you sponsorships. And so for me personally, no makeup brands have approached me about being sponsored because I don't promote buying makeup. So, it can affect the bottom line of YouTubers. Let's talk a little bit about ethics, which I did touch on earlier. It's true that people are, especially women who are the primary consumers of makeup, the environment is getting more and more sort of at the front of people's minds, and they're wanting to consume more environmentally friendly products. And so companies will have to adjust to this and have begun to. I mean, we're seeing like refillable products from Charlotte Tilbury. We're seeing more recycled materials being used, more conscious packaging. So hopefully we will continue to see this, and it will become, part of the actual brand of a company rather than just them doing some greenwashing, which is often what happens. Of course, we don't want to solve overconsumption with more consumption, but just, a different kind, a greener kind of consumption with more recycled materials. We actually want to decrease the overall consumption, which is an issue for makeup companies because that essentially means, again, it affects their bottom lines. It means people buying fewer products. Of course, it's not just the environment. There's a ton of issues that affect the makeup industry, such as regular animal testing, brands that are not cruelty-free, widespread child labor, and of course the mining of dangerous ingredients. So individuals can do their best to choose vegan and cruelty-free products and more environmental products, but we don't necessarily have access to information about, if child labor was used or even what kind of materials are in our products, at least not unless we really, really do our research. As Aja Barber stated in her book, sustainability cannot be a change in material. It must be a change in the entire way the system of exploitation operates. But of course, corporations will continue their practices despite human rights violations as long as it positively impacts their bottom line. This is not true across the board, but in an increasingly competitive and oversaturated market, it's challenging for a new company to break the mold or operate differently. There are, of course, a handful of brands that are choosing to act differently, and these include Aether Beauty, Salt New York, and Elate Cosmetics, among others. So, these brands differentiate themselves by donating some of their proceeds to social and environmental causes, being part of the 1% for the Planet, which is an organization that aims to prevent greenwashing and provide accountability, or by having carbon zero footprint manufacturing facilities, and even being vocal about their progressive politics. So, as I mentioned before, Black founded companies were created in reaction to racist industry practices. Independent companies are actually filling in the gap where major beauty brands are falling short. Before we wrap up, I do want to mention briefly, I could do a whole video on this, but like the end cycle of makeup, that's not really considered. Additionally, some companies are implementing recycling programs like the Back to Mac program and TerraCycle, which accepts, makeup empties and then recycles those, because a lot of makeup, it just ends up in the trash, especially if it's expired or you've had it for too long. It's not really like clothing, because you can't pass it on to someone else. Makeup does expire, and a lot of people are worried about the cleanliness of passing along makeup. So that part is tricky, but really the onus is on makeup companies to educate their consumers on how to dispose of their products. And of course, the larger the makeup collection, the more challenging it is to actually use up your full collection. So larger collections will of course result in more waste. Okay, we're at the conclusion. So I think all this to say, makeup is complex. The beauty industry is complex. Shopping for makeup can be considered both a type of therapy and also a type of addiction. It can be simultaneously liberating and used to enforce the gender binary. It intersects with important issues like classism, misogyny, racism. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and so almost all of us, at least women, are implicated in it. The makeup industry is able to profit off of our insecurities, which they themselves created, and the worse that we feel about ourselves, often the more products we buy, which is a good thing for them and a bad thing for us. Influencers are very important in this industry as they have the power to affect purchasing decisions of many consumers because of their relationship with their audience. They're very effective salespeople. And so if we are going to see a change in the industry, I think it really starts with them. Solutions, of course, also need to come from brands, from government regulations, and from continuing education on the part of consumers themselves so that we demand better from corporations. The onus is on them, but they are not going to make changes by themselves because we do live in a capitalist society, and unfortunately that's just how things are at the moment. What we need to work towards is a circular system rather than a linear system where there is a landfill, sort of an end to the product. But in order to get there, as Aja Barber says, we need a cultural shift in how we view consumption. And I really do believe that the YouTube Project Pan and No Buy community is really sort of paving the way in that regard within this industry. And I really hope that we can continue to make a change and make an impact on the industry as a whole. So the cosmetics industry is able to either fall behind on consumer trends with their consumers' aims to be more ethical and environmental in their purchases, or it has the opportunity to act as a trailblazer. So that's gonna be it for today. Thank you for tuning in for this very long video. Please let me know what you think. I will include many links down below. I hope this wasn't too dry. It was a lot of fun to write, and though I did not cover nearly everything, and I didn't even go through my entire essay. I left some sections out because it's very long. This is the final paper in my course. I hope you did enjoy it. I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Let me know if you want future videos similar to this one, or if there's any one particular topic within this that you want me to do a deep dive into, because I covered a lot of stuff. Let me know, and I will talk to you guys next time. Not going to talk about a book today because this video is already so long, and I highly encourage you to read Consumed by Aja Barber. Okay, bye everyone.